Welcome, and thank you for joining with us today. It is my incredible pleasure to be able to spend some time with a dear old friend who recently rose to the highest possible position in the American Fire Service. I'd like to introduce to everyone the brand new U.S. Fire Administrator, Laurie Moore. And Laurie is a name that is known throughout the fire service. Unless you joined yesterday, you've probably heard of Laurie or seen some of her work, or you've been impacted by some of her work. And she was just recently named by the Biden administration to be our new U.S. Fire Administrator and was sworn in last Friday, I believe, correct?
About 3 weeks ago, last Friday, yes.
So this is literally her first week on the job, and I'll try not to get her fired by asking it. I'm just teasing. So for full disclosure, Laurie and I have been great friends for over 30 years now. So ever since the beginning of her career, I remember when you first joined the IAFF years ago. So which I thought was wonderful and hard to believe that's 25 years ago or whatever it is now. 20. Yeah,
Long time. It's been 30 now. So we're right at 29 and a half.
So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, Madam Administrator, is to kind of give the audience an understanding of what the U.S. Fire Administration is. Oddly enough, a lot of our fire service training, our recruit training and such, does not do a very good job, in my opinion, of educating our incoming firefighters about the role of the U.S. Fire Administration, how it came into being, what it means and to us as firefighters, and what it can do for us as firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, really, which I think is a misnomer. When I say firefighters, I hope for the duration of this conversation, I mean the entire firefighter, the paramedic, the EMT, the arson investigator. We have so many roles within that title of firefighter, so many functionalities, and people think it's just the firefighting side of it. Please, and with the U.S. Fire Administration, that is absolutely not the case. It runs the gamut from entry-level cadet firefighter to highest level administrator and everything in between, educator, you name it, down the line. So historically, as I remember, and for me, obviously his history has to come first, around 1947, we had the Wyckoff fire, and that initiated Truman, and Truman had his own little fire in the White House, which really lit a fuse underneath him. I believe it was on Christmas too. It was a Christmas fire, if I'm not mistaken. So around the 40s, we started getting very interested in fire as a national problem. And firefighting is very parochial. There's no doubt about it. And government closest to the people is the best kind of government. And obviously services closest to the people, the best services. But there needed to be some national representation, so that funding, so that data exchange, information, which is much how FDIC started. It was instructors trying to share information. So Truman kind of gets going with America Burning and the Truman retreat that he had for a few, with fire service leaders. And then we fast forward, I believe, all the way to Ford in the 70s, 73, 74. And President Ford starts looking at how fire is a national issue. And back then, the death rate in fire, residential fire, was in, I believe, like 10,000 a year or higher. It was extremely high. And remember, folks didn't have smoke detectors, they didn't have cell phones. And so people were dying at an incredibly high rate. A few years later, I think it's Carter, initiates FEMA, took what Ford had created, and I apologize, I can't remember the original title. It wasn't Fire Administration.
So it was the Fire Prevention and Control Act of 1974, actually, that established what we know today as the U.S. Fire Administration. So that was you're spot on. It was Gerald Ford who signed that. It established, again, what is now the USFA, but originally it was the Fire Prevention and Control Act, and it was based on the America Burning report. So a lot of the statistics that you're talking about, came out of that report, and it was this where we focus as a country on the fire problem. And it was the crazy high number of fire fatalities without any kind of prevention efforts that were taking place. So really were the driver behind establishing the USFA. And now the USFA originally was put under the Department of Commerce. And so it wasn't moved to FEMA and under the Homeland Security the Department of Homeland Security until after 9/11.
Really?
So 11 happened, yes. So 9/11, after 9/11, when the Department of Homeland Security was stood up by President Bush, then FEMA was put there, and we were taken and put underneath FEMA. Now, something that a lot of folks may not know is that we originally, USFA was at what we call a presidential appointment Senate confirmed level. Now, for the politicians out there, they'll understand what that means. After 9/11, our status was somewhat reduced, and we were made and dropped to just a presidential appointment. So we are no longer in a Senate confirmed level because we sit under FEMA. And that was a change that I don't think in the moment the fire service realized, what was happening. I think our national leaders all agreed to it in the moment because they saw it, as a path forward, and we're part of Homeland Security now. But being in that moment again, post 9/11, I'm not sure that we were really realizing the overall impact that could have on the status, if you will, of the USFA. And I think it really, through the last 20 years, has minimized our capability to have impact.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the number one rule of life is the rule of unintended consequences.
Yes.
Seriously. I mean, you can do something, albeit with the best of intentions, and the peripheral fallout from everything we do. And I think that you said it very well. The people who did it had the very best of intentions, much like, in my opinion, the Patriot Act. I think there's problems with that. And everyone was very concerned about, the issues of the time. And I think that just like what they did with civil liberties, we're seeing also with the effectiveness of the U.S. Fire Administration, which is a problem. And hopefully the fact that we're recognizing it now, and especially at your level, perhaps we can do something to extract us from this, prison of two ideas, right? You can still have security and autonomy. They're not mutually exclusive. They can exist simultaneously. So there's our history. There's where we are today. And so you answer to the director of FEMA then.
The administrator of FEMA, I do, yes.
So you answer to the FEMA administrator. That's where you're at. And your role, and I'll this is where I get technical. I'll quote you. The mission of the Fire Administration is to support and strengthen fire emergency services and medical services and stakeholders to prepare for, prevent, mitigate, and respond to all hazards. Now, that's a very simple sentence that incorporates about 11,542 different ideas.
Absolutely. And words matter, right? That's what I always say. After you quote that mission, I go back and I take it apart word by word, because the power of a word, right? So what does it mean to strengthen and to support? And then who are all of those players? And what is the real mission in the context of which our mission, occurs? So it really talks about the environment. It talks about what our role as USFA is supposed to be. And what I hear from that is that we are to focus on our departments and our responders, right? That's what I hear in that it is the role of the fire administration to make sure that our people on the front line are prepared, they're protected, they're trained, right? We have the appropriate research, the data to, make the decisions appropriately so that they are well equipped, supported, and strengthened to serve their communities. And I think the trickle down is through our responders, from the USFA through our departments and responders to the community, which in my opinion is a very different mission than that of FEMA, which is, where we sit, our parent organization now, and their deployment directly to the community after our people have been on the ground for some number of hours or days. And so that's where I see our mission within the overall impact of where we sit.
Well, and every single one of those words matters incredibly. And what's even more interesting, and I'll get to it in a little bit, I opened up, just for my own edification, your job description, which I thought was fascinating, which has got a lot more words. So good luck. But to Laurie's points, when we talk about these specific words here, and let's start with these words here, when the fire administration was formed back in the 70s, they bought Seton, I think it was called Seton Hall, a girls' college, which is a fascinating piece of history. Elizabeth Ann Seton and the
Yes.
Shrine and the Civil War and Claire Barton. And I mean, you want to go back in time and really, for a history buff, to be on that ground alone, it's amazing. That ground has so much going on, right? So anyway,
Yes.
This college was purchased to become a training academy for the fire service. So that's part of the role that I think jives very well with what you just said, Laurie. If you want to help first responders, if you want to help firefighters, and I think it's important, when we're talking about it, to help the folks to do all of what's called for. We've got to have a place where we do some free education, if you will, that people can take out from there. And then there's the regional delivery stuff. So you have the campus of the National Fire Academy, and then you have the outreach programs. So in your mind, and I know there's the Fire Safe and FireWise, and there's all the programs that are out there. Most of our audience knows that. As you're looking at that delivery system, and I get it, no good administrator does anything for the first 90 days. For the first 90 days, just shake hands and kiss babies, or shake babies and kiss hands, whichever one works best for you. But you try to really understand your environment first before you come in like a bull in a china shop and change the name or change the patch or something incredibly stupid like that. So, which I've seen done by new administrators, not at your level, but I mean, local fire chiefs come in and day one, they, trash half the staff. So looking at what we're doing right now at the National Fire Academy in relation to your mission, how do you see us moving forward?
That's a great question. So yes, training, and I'm gonna take you back to the logo for a minute, Bobby, if I can, because the fire administration logo is an eagle, and we should have probably prepared to have that to flash up. So it's an eagle with 4 stars, right? And those 4 stars have meaning. One of those 4 stars represents training, and so training is huge. And the National Fire Academy portion of the USFA is also, a huge piece of what we do. Now, the legacy classes, and this is something that I said at my swearing in, is that I want to make sure that we evaluate what we're doing, and we're going to take time to do that. Is it relevant to today's response environment? We talk about our mission being all hazards. If we are still training traditionally and what we've done, the past 100 years, then we are missing the mark, because we do have to still train, obviously, for fire response. We've got to prepare, for prevention. We want community risk assessment. But I think that all hazards concept certainly has broadened since the original report, right, of America Burning, because we are dealing with wildland now, and particularly the interface is where we live. And I think we've got to be prepared for that. We're looking at a new risk and threat environment. And I think us being able to train and respond with our law enforcement partners is a big piece of that. So these, and of course, not to mention, EMS, obviously. And so these are things that I want to make sure that we're meeting the mark, because if we're going to strengthen and support the masses of our responders, then we've got to be hitting the mark on training. So this last year has been tough. Last 18 months has been tough. And of course, I've only been here, like we said, I'm on my 15th day right now, but I know that they were very agile. They went to online training during COVID. We were able to be successful in training, 80,000 people last year. And that's significant. Moving a lot of the campus operation to regional operations. So there is some agility there that I'm really excited about, to see what we can continue to do with that. I think expanding the online capability, we've all learned how to do that now as best we can. And clearly not everything's going to fit in that venue, but where we can, it will. And then, of course, the state, weekends, those are going to be expanded. We're going back to full capacity just after the first of the year. And so that is exciting to be able to do that and have our classes back on campus and in full capability. But I do want to spend some time going through the curriculum and making sure that we're meeting the mark of what we're, training on today, because we have to match the training to what our folks in the field are doing. And if we're not doing that, then we're failing. And so that's unacceptable to me.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, we become comfortable. You have course delivery systems that go and go and go. And when you look at I look at some of the college curricula these days because I serve on a few boards, and I look at some of these courses and I'm thinking, okay, if I took that in the 60s and 70s, that's a problem. And if the description hasn't changed much, okay, that's a problem. And I'm not saying it has to be, and I'm not talking about ancient wisdom. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about philosophy or that type of thing where you've got just our great literature where you just have to learn. But the other side of it is when you're talking about operational activities, that's a different set. So I'm glad to hear that. So let's keep diving down, because I want to get your opinion on a whole bunch of stuff. So one of the things you're supposed to be doing is conducting research that supports responder health and safety, obviously, which has been. Oh, well, hang on a second. Before we get too far down the line, especially on this bullet point, I missed part of my point. Okay, so we know what the role of the fire academy is: train, support, prepare, mitigate. The role of the administrator, my gosh, hang on a second. Let me just I'm going to give you the bullet points. Okay. The administrator's mission, as defined by the Post-Katrina Reform Act, is to reduce the loss of life, property, the nation from hazards, supporting leading risk-based comprehensive emergency management, system of preparedness and protection, response recovery. Administrators responsible for protecting against, responding to, recovering from, mitigating against natural disaster, acts of terrorism, man-made disaster, shall partner with state, local, build a national emergency management system, shall integrate dimensions of protection, response, recovery, mitigation, response, confront challenges of natural disaster, terrorism, other measures, find the administration, coordinate, and implement risk-based whole measures, find a cure for cancer, and talk directly to God. So I think
I'm doing the last one first.
I think that's the easiest one.
Yeah.
So wow, that's a pretty amazing description. So
you know what that means, Bobby, though, is that it's going to require, and this is why I'm excited about this moment in time and being able to sit in the seat. And I'm grateful for the support of the national organizations who helped put me here, honestly. And so it's going to require the heads of all of those organizations. It's going to require all of our researchers. It's going to require you. It's going to require our national leadership and the trickle down from those people to come together to do this, to do all of that, right? No one person's going to do that. Can I come up with the ideas and pull people together? I've been doing that for 30 years, as you know. That's why we're so close, is because you have that same philosophy. We move together, we move forward together. And I think that, can we do those things? I think we're on that path, but it's going to take all of us, coalescing and making sure we're moving forward together. And so having the energy to do that is what I'm hoping to maintain.
So not everyone has been as fortunate as me to have, I actually dated Laurie in the 70s, so I can just, she was a teenager. You probably weren't even a teenager for that.
Yeah, so, in the 70s, yes, I was.
Were you really? Okay. So tell us about your history at Fairfax. Why don't you let everybody know where were you born? Where were you raised? How were you? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you start? Give us the Laurie Moore-Merrell Moore.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I was born in the Nashville area, so just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up there. Went to school in Memphis. Headed toward medical school, honestly. So I did my undergraduate at the what is now the University of Memphis. Back then it was Memphis State University. And I was headed to medical school at University of Tennessee. And in first year, just before I was entering, Memphis Fire Department was hiring. Well, I had gone to paramedic school, EMT and paramedic school at night while I was doing my undergrad, because I just wanted to have, some additional background. I really loved emergency medicine. And so that's kind of where I was headed. Well, I had a paramedic certification that I got in 1984. And so with that, I'm like, oh, the fire department's hiring. That would be so cool, right? And so I applied, and I was the 6th woman hired in Memphis, Tennessee Fire Department. And so I came in as a fire paramedic there, and spent 7 years on the job in Memphis, responding and learning a lot, and being in a situation where I know we've evolved a lot in the fire service, but when I went into the stations, they were ill-equipped. We had, one bathroom. It wasn't like labeling was not an option, because there was only, one set of showers or one locker room. So there was, a lot of growing pains, I think, along those times. I can't remember ever being, what I would call offended in those circumstances, because I had men who stepped up to mentor. And I am so grateful for those people, because I have had people like that step up my whole life. There weren't women at the time to mentor in this capacity. And so I'm really grateful for men who were leaders, who were not threatened, by this new change that was happening in the fire service. And so I really had some great people who helped teach me the ropes, so to speak. And so in 1993, I was then recruited by Al Whitehead to come to the IFF and lead as their EMS specialist at the time, because that was a time when the private ambulance companies were starting to go, public on the stock exchanges. We saw them really growing, and as a threat, honestly, at the time, to the fire service and our overall well-being, to the jobs. And so I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked for Al Whitehead for 7 years while he was remaining in his presidency. And I tell you, he took a lot of flack for hiring a woman. And so this is sort of part of the history. A lot of people don't know that. But the executive board at that time were not an advocate. And I often say, if Al had not been from California, we just lost him recently, as you know. And if he had not been from California, I would have never been able to be hired at the IFF. And I believe that. I think the mentality of just being much more open-minded about women in the fire service at that time, and him, beginning to grow and have that mindset, and he was looking for a skill set and less about, male female situation, right? And so I expanded there. Then I worked for Harold Shapeberger for the next 20 years. And before retiring, to really carry on with some of the research that we had done over time. So while I was at the IFF, I had the opportunity not only to lead and build some real EMS, fire-based EMS resources, but really get in the field, as you know, with looking at crew size and time to task at low hazard, fires, right? What is the minimum number of firefighters we need to send in order that we don't kill our firefighters, that we don't have, this continued fire fatality for civilians, and that we can minimize property loss? How do we show up, right, with the appropriate trained and appropriate number of individuals to do the job, so that we are not vulnerable to bad things happening? And so we did that in the low hazard environment. We did that in the high rise environment. We looked at, a high rise fire. We put over 6,000 firefighters through a multi-unit drill in order to capture data on crew size, on what a first alarm ought to look like, a second alarm ought to look like. What do these deployments, why do they matter? How does that matter to the fire service and to these firefighters who are responding? And so making sure that we were capturing information in the research. And so I spent my career building on that kind of research, at the IFF, and was very fortunate to work for leaders who bought into the research need. And as part of that, then we got really into data, right? And we realized at the time that the data that we've been collecting for years in the fire service, and this is going to tie back to USFA, and I know we're going to talk about this, but the data we've been collecting in the fire service for years, as researchers, we couldn't even use. It's of such poor quality. And I know there's a lot of summarizing that comes out of it, and there's a lot of reports that are generated. But if you want to do real impactful research that is valid, and the data to back it up, you're not going to use our legacy data system. And so we began to build tools, and these tools then that could do data capture, and we could look at the risk environment, and we could couple non-traditional data into fire service data to really tell our story. And that's what I've told fire chiefs and local presidents, throughout the years. You've got to be able to tell your story. If you are going to maintain your budgetary funding, if you're going to maintain the resources, get your PPE, build new stations, you've got to be able to tell your story and your value to that community. And it has to be customized to your department. There's not, and you know this, Bobby, not one size fits all, right? We have to be able to talk about this and have leaders who are data savvy, and not just the data itself, but the intelligence, right? The knowledge that comes from that data and how you put it together to tell that story. And so that's what I have been doing through my career, and how I have now arrived here, and we'll see what impact we can make in this context.
Well, and I think that what I like about your background, about your history, other than the fact that I think you're a good person, which I think is the most important thing, but that you do have a strong sense for data collection, but not just gross numbers. The problem with data is that everybody wants to look at the big numbers. Well, they'll just tell you why how many lemmings are going off the cliff. The small data, the why, is why you want to know what the big data. What's generating that trend, right? And that's one of the jobs of the U.S. Fire Administration, is to look at emerging trends as they relate to fire safety, and overall, really, I think part of that mission needs to be looked at in terms of survivability, health with our citizenry, because of our incredibly dynamic role inside of the EMS system, right? So, and that's not very well articulated in our mission statement for the U.S. Fire Administration. To just mention emergency medical services is fine, but patient survivability is really the key aspect of that element, right? So yes. I love your background, which is why I thought, oh my God, of all the things to miss, we're going to talk about data. So Laurie's got tremendous history with data, and I think she understands, or I know you understand, is that, Benjamin Disraeli said it best: there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And what he meant was, he was a brilliant British politician, and what he meant was that people can take a data set and use it to validate all kinds of crazy things through either omission or poor presentation or whatever they want to do. But a true analysis always results in an aha moment, like,
yes,
wow, you're doing good work when you're surprised by your own work. And if your work is just validating, if you've got a solution and you're looking for a problem, good for you. You know what I mean? But if you're trying to figure out, a better way to do a process or a system, which is why I think as we talk about the research, I think people always think when we talk about research, they're looking at, fire behavior, or we're looking at, bunker gear performance, or we're looking at, building construction performance. But it goes even deeper than that. There's the human performance element. And that's yes. why I think that, one of the things we've really done a terrible job with overall, not just in the fire service, but in basically Western Civ, is understanding how people really react in context to different influences, and then subsequently decide to act, right? And there's just an absolute plethora of information out there that's just been ignored by the American Fire Service. I mean, it's just amazing to me. But it's not just the American Fire Service. And then there's some really stupid stuff that's just been embraced. I read a report recently about a man who was in England who got in a traffic accident, and they accused him of losing situational awareness. And I'm thinking, okay, what do you replace it with? Sawdust? Because you can't lose situational awareness. He was either distracted or he was paying attention to something else, or he was, confused, whatever. But you can't lose situational awareness because it's a construct. It's not a thing. It's not, you can't build up your situational awareness by taking vitamin C or working out in the gym. It's just not how it works, and so there's all these really bad constructs out there that people have elevated into principles, if you will, which are just gibberish, right? And I see a lot of that in our training out there, the chain of events stuff. You'll see, if you can just stop one link in the chain, the accident wouldn't happen. Okay, well, maybe in the 1600s, that was probably okay. But today is a dynamically complex environment. And what's wonderful about having somebody like you in the driver's seat now is that you understand that in today's modern environment, you can control almost nothing, but you can influence everything. And it's that influence that makes the difference, right? And I don't mean nudge like those horrible people who wrote that book are talking about, because I thought that was it was just almost evil. But openly, positively influencing things to say, wow, think about this, right? And helping people to be able to embrace that, yeah, sometimes you need to have a search line before you enter a building, and sometimes no, you need to get into the building. You need to, so risk analysis, I think, is a big piece of the research that we need to continue to do. And that's going to continue to evolve, right? Because
absolutely,
it ain't getting easier, and
and I love what you're saying, Bobby, because risk analysis is absolutely key. And as we said just a moment ago, if you've seen one community, you've seen one community. And we have to not even compare. I mean, we can't compare a Houston to a Detroit. They are so vastly different in their risk environment. And it's not just the built environment. It's not just the landscape or the streets. I'm talking about your overall population demographic. I'm talking about, the weather. These are things that impact our call volume. They impact the type of calls. They impact our performance on scene. And so it's not just that risk environment, before an event occurs. It's the event in the context of that environment that matters. And then our responders are going in, and we talk about, use situational awareness. So is that important? Absolutely, it's important. But I think the bigger question is, the situational understanding, right? So put it in context. It's not just to be aware of your surroundings. You better understand them, right? It's the so what of my situation. And I think that's where we've got to do better at understanding our risk environment into which we respond, preparing our people for the way they're going to respond. That's why I'm not an advocate that one size training fits all. I think we better be training to your risk environment, right? I don't need to be trained in high rise if I don't have any high rise in the community in which I'm responding. And so these are the kinds of things that I think we as a fire service really need to pay attention to, that situational understanding, and then matching our resources deployed to that event. That's where we reduce, and making sure there's a match, because that's where we reduce our overall vulnerability to firefighter injury and death, civilian injury and death, and property loss. If we can match well our resources to the risk environment. And it's not just about the number. Although the number is important, it's about how they're trained. It's about their PPE, because wildland, their PPE is atrocious. We've got to do better there, right? We can't just send them in with structural PPE. So these are the things that I mean. We've got to better match how we deploy, how we train. And that's the situational understanding piece.
Right. You have to understand what the issue is. You have to clearly understand what the issues are, or what it is. And then you need to have a goal. In other words, and that goal may shift over time, but you need to have an objective. So often people start throwing on solutions before they've ever defined the problem. In other words, okay, this happened, but why? And then I think the other thing is that, we've had the near miss reporting system for a long time, and all of that, and great effort, and I understand it. But I think the problem is that, just saying somebody zigged when they zagged doesn't tell me anything. Why did they zig instead of zagging? Then I can understand then I can better prepare myself if I'm encountering a similar situation. But if they're just stupid, then I'm okay. And I think that that's the kind of research that I'm hoping, we start to see more of out of the National, Fire Administration. So it's something that can help us down the road. I want to talk about a couple of things that are important to me. And one of them is the emergency medical community, which is, both of us serve as paramedics on the job, and I'm very proud of it. And I think it's been underserved by the U.S. Fire Administration, I think as a whole. And I want to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have, a fire service today that has not embraced, EMS. It is the fire service, right? And you said it right when we started. When we say the word firefighter, it no longer just means the guys who go in with the water and put it on the fire, right? It means EMS. It means hazmat. It means tech rescue. It means confined space, right? It means all of these things in context. And so the very word firefighter in its definition now embraces this all hazards capability. And if we have departments who are not there yet, they got to wake up, because that's who you are. That's who the fire service is. It is this all hazards, and EMS is a huge piece of that. Are we the safety net for the emergency medical, community? Absolutely. And one of the things that I often caution, because we'll often get our EMS, and I'll say single role just for definition, but our non-fire-based EMS community sometimes will kind of take it and say, well, it's about the ambulance. It's all the medical care. It's the patient care. Those are important. Absolutely. But I think that we've got to not lose context of there's this intersection with public safety that is critical. And that is that first response capability with a paramedic engine or, a heavy rescue truck. That's EMS too. And our overall deployment, EMS is not about the vehicle. And sometimes that gets lost, particularly at what I'm learning at the national level and have learned over years, because they don't understand it. Because always we say, follow the money. Well, the money historically has been tied to that ride to the hospital.
Not anymore.
Not EMS, not anymore. That's correct. And that's not EMS. Our baseline unit for EMS response is a fire engine, because that's our baseline safety net. You've got an engine in every station in this country. That's who's going first. Then you've got about half as many trucks and about half as many, ambulances. Those are technically your second in units. I don't care what you're going to, because that engine is our base, and that's the all hazards unit. And so for me, that's where we've really got to maintain in context that EMS is not about a vehicle. It's about, again, training and matching our capabilities to the response separate from the vehicle. Get me a vehicle that can get me the person who's trained there fast. That's our engine, right? And then I'll get you the transport, we'll get you the higher level care, whatever it is that comes with that. But that for me is where I think we've got still some work to do in orientation at the national level.
I couldn't agree with you more. And what's amazing to me is, I very rarely hear so full disclosure, we could say they're our friends, that we love them. But I remember when you first came on and I met you in like 85 or 86, we were down in Phoenix. It was me, I was working for Alan, and, we were doing something, and Al was still the boss. And we were talking a little about EMS. And I remember good friends of mine, AFF people, saying, we'll never accept that. I'm like, guys, we're doing it everywhere. What do you mean you'll never accept it? It's already like, my grandfather once said the only reason for a man to go in a burning building was to save another man. That was his, and he was a New York City firefighter. So that was his take on the job, right? Because that's the only reason we exist, is to save people. Ed Croker, our highest moment, right? So I think in that context, this is so long overdue to just bring it all together, right? Bring it all together. Just stop with, this is something else we do. No, it's what we do. It's why we go into burning buildings, to pull people out so we can do EMS. We're going in there to save lives. And so I'm so glad to have a medic in there, now a fire medic in there that can preach the word of, and I love the private. I think that there are communities that need to have a transport service or a private service as well. That's great because it augments anything you can do to make people safer. I'm all for,
Absolutely.
if the community, and I think, somebody once asked me about scheduling, right, for fire service. And they said, well, you worked the 4896. And I did, and I loved it. And people said, well, how'd that work? I said, it worked because the troops loved it. I said, if your troops love 24 on, 24 off, if they love 40, it's what works for that community, for those people. 4896. And I was I was Saul on the road to Damascus. I was persecuting the guys trying to make that change back in, I was like 81 or 82 in Albuquerque. And I was like fighting them tooth and nail. And I was like the union steward at the time too. So I had I was a bully, and, I kept people in line. I was a bigger guy back then. And so, but once I started to live it, I found out, wow, it was great for my own personal life, for my crew, for all of us. It was a good thing. So anyway, long story monotonous, sometimes we're against something because we just don't know what it is.
Exactly.
We don't understand it, or intimidated by it, or all kinds of reasons, myself included. We're not, probably my greatest trait is my hypocrisy. And my humility. My humility is my other greatest trait. But you know what I mean? Just like all of us, we're always in such a contradiction, right? And so when Laurie and I are talking, we're fire people. We love the fire service, but we do not dislike private ambulance people or private agencies. And we get it. Not everybody wants to be a firefighter. And there's a place for everyone in this world. There literally is, so please, we just want to make that clear that this is a conversation about the U.S. Fire Administration and fire service. And so that's our first love. It'll always be my first love. It'll always be my priority. And I would encourage every fire department in America to look at having at least ALS transport capability at all times when necessary, because there are times when there is just no room to wait. You just
that's right.
Go. And
that's right.
Having been in the streets a long time, if there's just times when you go. And it's a judgment call. So now that we've got that out of the way, Madam Administrator, I'm not going to get into all the outreach programs and all the other stuff. If you have some time, folks, while you're listening, please go to the U.S. Fire Administration website, and you would be amazed at all of the things that Laurie is now responsible for. You've got one of the things that I think is really important, and people don't realize it, but tribal affairs. There's a large portion of the American Fire Service that operates on tribal land, and yes. I live right here in Indian country. Very proud of it. Beautiful, beautiful place to live. Beautiful, beautiful property that they manage. But and we just had a very interesting Supreme Court decision about tribal land, which has changed a lot of things, and it's going to affect the fire service as well. And I know you're probably working your way through some of that. But talk to me a little bit about, and please look at all the stuff that she has to look at, because it's pretty amazing. But I want to talk about, obviously, you're not in charge of BLM, and I don't mean black, I mean Bureau of Land Management. So that's not your wheelhouse, but clearly, if fire should go onto BLM land or tribal land or National Park Service or National Forest Service, clearly that's when the U.S. Fire Administrator needs to have a voice. And as you said earlier, we have a PPE issue, right? We have a recruitment and retention issue. We've got a command and control issue. A lot of people, the Wildland Coordinating Group, which is probably some of the most elegant, intelligent, well-prepared human beings for their mission that I have ever met. I've never had more positive experiences than when I go and I visit with those people and learn from them. Because if you want to talk about a group of people who've avoided mission creep, in other words, they have stayed in their lane, the National Wildland Coordinating folks out of Idaho manage one of the most dynamically complex, intricate systems that I think exists in government, really. And when you look at when they put 20,000, 30,000 people on the ground, simultaneously across a geographic area of 30, 40, 50, 60 miles, sometimes 100 miles, multiple area commands, and they do it so seamlessly. I had the great pleasure of working with the Great Basin team for a while, and just amazing to watch, and the brilliance of it. And New York City has been sending its men and women out routinely with them just to see the elegance of the command and control model that they have inside that system. All that notwithstanding, we have a tremendous problem with managing the information flow about weather behavior, geographic issues, and survivability in those terrains. And the old saying, Mother Nature will pick her time, she'll pick her place, and she'll kick your ass is never been truer than in the wildland. And unfortunately, whether it's Yarnell or Storm King Mountain or, the list goes on and on, we've had tragic loss of life because of incredibly fast weather condition changes, incredibly dangerous terrain, and the results were just mind-numbing. So I know there's a great amount of work being done on weather tracking and communication, and I know there's a great amount of work being done by people about geographically being able to pinpoint individual firefighters and crews on the ground. How are you going to address that as the U.S. Fire Administrator? What are you going to bring to bear? What are your, and I know you don't have a gigantic detailed plan yet, but is that on your radar scope? Because a lot of the folks, people don't understand, you've got a lot of private contractors in there. You've got men and women who own great firefighting companies that deploy and they employ people. They're private, but they're every bit as dedicated to fighting fire as anybody else in this world. And they do an incredible job. So I'm not talking about the government takeover of it, but what are you going to do to start? Where do you begin with that problem?
I tell you, that's a fantastic question. So I'll start by saying that is where I literally walked in, 3 weeks ago, in the midst of an administration who is completely focused on climate change, and this wildland, particularly the WUI, is a big piece of that. And it's all being, as you said, the weather influences are huge. And so I have, within the last few days, made some decisions to move some staff out of the USFA staff who are, sectioned off for wildland urban interface primarily, because just to give you some context, the Department of Interior, the USDA, they are really with the forestry piece, right? So that is the wildland, and that's their sort of scope. Our scope really fits in the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And so we have already begun to partner. Even before I arrived, the partnerships had started, and we are solidifying those, that we are working in concert. And so this, the Biden administration is pulling out every stop to bring together whatever needs to come together to stop this problem. And we are going to be a big player at that table. And I'm pushing to make sure that it is the USFA, not just FEMA. And the FEMA administrator is supportive of that. USFA has to be at this table. And so we are making sure we are on every interagency group that is having this discussion. We are making sure that we are on every external committee. And so that we have that kind of capability to weigh in, because again, it is our people who are on the front lines in this urban interface. And that is what's happening. So this WUI problem, the wildland urban interface issue, is no longer, a California or West Coast problem. It's no longer, a Florida problem. This is affecting literally almost every department in this country, because even if you're not responding, your department may be coming in to cover, right, for those who are responding. And so we have to be cognizant of the trickle-down effects on our overall national preparedness and capability to respond. So what I've done initially is 2 people I'm bringing in to answer directly to me. I'm pulling them in. And so I will be dealing with the WUI and the wildland issue directly. I have a policy expert who is already, laying the land. What do we need to do to make sure we're in all of these places that I mentioned? And I'm bringing in an individual right now who's actually heretofore was 2 layers down from the administrator, but I'm bringing him in to be answer directly to me so that I can communicate with him. And he is in Boise. So we are connected directly, right? So we do have the reach to be able to do that. So these are things that I'm already putting in place to make sure that we are a player in this issue. The other thing is that we are, even this week, we were out at NIST, and NIST, their wildland group, and a lot of people have not been paying attention. NIST is doing some incredible experiments that really get down to the details of how close can you put a shed to your home before that shed becomes a wick with embers, right? And your fence becomes a wick to your neighbor's home. Because this, and to put that in context of the science and what NIST is doing, is that, from a FEMA perspective, we'll never stop hurricanes. We won't be able to stop the tornadoes. So we're going to have to respond to those effects. But the wildland urban interface fires, we can stop. And that's the one disaster that literally fuels itself. And we have a role to intervene. And so we're really looking at USFA being the mouthpiece almost from the science. So NIST conducts these experiments. We're going to be participating, and then we will translate that science into practice, into messages that we can get to the fire service and they can get to their communities. Also, we'll be, informing the standards and the codes in this regard. So to me, we're coming back around to data and science again, right? But this is where we're going to be able to have impact. So the wildland is going to be a really big deal for me going forward. Wildland urban interface, we've got to make sure that we're clarifying whether it's forestry or whether it's us, and how we're going to coalesce to really impact this problem. And as I mentioned earlier, the PPE for me is a big deal. Our wildland firefighters and even our structural firefighters being deployed in the interface are experiencing unbelievable exposures right now. And so we have got to really intervene with PPE. So I know the University of San Diego they have a grant right now. They're working on some of the PPE measurements, looking at, the materials, all those sorts of things. But if we do not limit the exposures, but, using PPE of these firefighters, we are going to see an exacerbating rate of cancers from these fires that we are experiencing now this past year, past 18 months. So this, to me, has a sense of urgency as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I also think that there's a tremendous lack of understanding about ecology and nature. Fire is necessary in nature.
Yes.
Very necessary. And people don't understand that. It's part of a healthy forest, or even healthy land anywhere, is fire. And so, when people say we're going to stop, that was Clifford Pinochet's, great debacle. Pinochet was the first head of the U.S. Forest Service, appointed by Teddy Roosevelt. And on his very first day, he said, with the formation of the U.S. Forest Service, we'll never see another conflagration in America. A year later was the Big Burn, still the largest fire of all time. So
right.
Yeah, Mother Nature was paying attention, Cliff, and smacked you right in the head. Interesting character too. Used to talk to his dead wife. She was dead for 25 years, and he would hold conversations with her. So great character. If you want to do a little history on the U.S. Fire Service, it's pretty amazing. The characters we've had, right? But he was friends with John Muir too, which is amazing, right? So, and I agree with everything you said, but I think inside of there, it's a huge nut, right? In other words, I look at some of these communities where we're trying to protect, where they've built roads that are basically impassable with 2 normal-sized vehicles,
yes.
more or less a Type 1 engine, right? And then when you look at the fuel loading, I mean, we talk about fuel loading in residential, and most of the folks listening to us here are probably very familiar with a residential fuel load measurement. When you start getting out into nature, the fuel loads become, by a magnitude more improbable. And the most recent fire modeling that I was able to look at carefully was a few years back, was the Montana folks. And they were actually looking at fire brands the size of, well, footballs, tissue boxes that could travel dozens of miles, not a few yards, dozens of miles. So, and one of those lands on the roof of your home and it's combustible, whatever, or it lands anywhere near, you've got a problem. So the amount of energy that's created in these events is almost beyond description, unless you've experienced it, right? So it's a wickedly complex problem, and that's a scientific term. When someone tells you something's wickedly complex, that's to a level that's like, right? I mean,
we're still struggling to answer, right?
Right. The quant mathematicians get involved, and that's when it really goes to pot. So and that's a good thing, right? We need to, there needs to be a certain amount of humility in everything we do first, right? And that's wisdom, right? We're going to try to understand what we're up against. But when you start talking about wildland fire behavior, holy cow, when you get up close and personal with it, if it doesn't humble you, you're a fool.
Absolutely. And, Bobby, everything you just said are things that we can have some impact, I believe. And I'll tell you that the embers, the fire brands that you just talked about, and the way that they move, I just got the report, and I got to, if I can give a shout out to Alex Marangides over at NIST. He has been an advocate for more than 12 years on this. And he's been saying the embers matter, right? And so the embers matter. And so I just got the campfire report and from him last week. And he said, Laurie, what we are learning here is that firefighters absolutely matter in the WUI. And what he means by that is that the homes where the firefighters could get to and defend survived because they were stopping the ember impact. But if you didn't have defense, your home is gone. Those embers matter and they do travel. And so we're beginning to see in science, but the impact of that is we don't have enough firefighters deployed to defend everything. That's how fast it's moving. So you're spot on. They're traveling for miles sometimes, and we don't have enough firefighters to put in play to defend. So we do have to do things like widening the roads for better evacuation, getting better roof materials, affecting, residential sprinklers, these things that are hardening as best we can against the embers, because once it starts in some of these communities, things are located and the science is coming to the parcel level so that, it's down to your lot, right? And the size of your lot and what you can and can't locate on that lot before now you're at huge risk to be a wick, because of the embers. So all of this science matters, and we've got to be prepared to not only promote the science, but actually take action, to make sure that it is implemented.
And I think there's a tremendous moral hazard too, that you need to be careful and maintain a little hubris, be careful about hubris. If you don't do this and don't do this, you'll be okay. Okay. Yeah. Maybe not so much, that kind of thinking led to, we don't need that many lifeboats, Captain Smith, we'll be okay.
Exactly.
So didn't work out that well. Yeah. Always have enough lifeboats for everybody.
Yes.
So that's kind of the big ones I want to talk about. So I want to kind of bring it all together at the end with just give you a chance to talk about, you talked about reestablishing some traction for the U.S. Fire Administration so that it can be not just an advocate, but a voice for the fire service and our needs, but it can also be kind of a rudder for us to help us identify trends and issues, that it can be a vehicle for us to help us improve our response capabilities. How should people expect our new Madam Administrator to do that? In other words, what's it going to feel like working, for Laurie Moore? In other words, what kind of chief are you going to be for us? And what's your assessment of, you in terms of the problems? And you kind of talked about it here by bringing in the right kind of voices and doing all this. But I think that there's no uniformity of opinion on anything, and that's a good thing. People think that science means that something's settled. Well, take a look at what the word science means. It means to question.
Yes.
Continuously, because we're always learning something else, right? So the science is never settled. So whenever you hear somebody saying the science is settled, that person's a moron. So you just keep that in the back of your mind. So, but you have to go forward with what you know at the time, right? You have to. That's how you have to operate in the world. It's just all you can do. You got to live with what you know. And so how are we going to see the U.S. Fire Administration with Laurie Moore up there? How are you going to make it more part of the day-to-day life of regular firefighters like me out on the street? What are you going to, how do we expect you to impact our lives, and how do you expect to impact our lives and make it better, not just for us, because a huge part of the U.S. Fire Administration has nothing to do with firefighters, has everything to do with the citizens, and that means working with the people that, validate toaster ovens and television sets and automobiles and all the rest of it. So how do we expect to hear from you and see you, and how are you going to bring your personality as our new American fire chief into the public arena?
Well, that's a big question. I guess the best answer for that, Bobby, is that I'm going to continue to be who I am. I have traditionally been, and I'll describe it as a leader of leaders. I'm going to continue to reach out to the leadership. I'm going to have an expectation that they step up. USFA is no longer just going to sit inside federal government and be, hamstrung to putting out, safety messages on the holidays. That's not going to work out for me. So we are going to show up. And I think that, as 99%, right? Showing up. We're going to show up.
Allen.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be part of the conversations. We're not going to step back from research. I want to be a full-fledged participant in whatever, research is going on out there in whatever context. So we have a lot of researchers who I've worked with for years. I want to continue those relationships. Only USFA, having a voice in that. And I think that, for us to stay the course or status quo is completely unacceptable. So as many things as I can, rock the boat inside, I fully intend to do that. And I've said, on my way in, I said, either, we're going to shake this up and we're going to facilitate some change on the inside, or I'll be invited to leave early, so we'll figure this out one way or the other. So status quo is not acceptable for me. Being, having the USFA be a non-player or being a secondary thought, behind FEMA or however that works out is not acceptable. We need a seat at the table. We need a player. We need to be a player. We have the voice to do that. And so, I'll be calling on the leadership who actually helped get me here, and the support of labor, the support of management. And, we're going to do this together. So I'm going to be reaching out and saying, make sure you don't forget to make sure we're at the table. Open those doors. I'm going to open the doors on the inside, figure out where they are. And I refer to it often as let me find the right door to go through here, and we're going to storm the castle. And so that's kind of my mindset of how we're going to facilitate change. And so I think that's kind of who I am. And I think you already know that, but that's the mindset that I'm going to bring to this position, like I have everywhere else that I have sat in my career.
Well, I think you're, my wife always says that God puts us where we're supposed to be. I think I think you're,
Amen.
I think you're where you're supposed to be, and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I've got, of course, you know me, I've got 27,400 pages of notes here to keep badgering you with, but I won't, because I took over an hour of your time. But I do want to say thank you for doing this for fire engineering in particular, but also doing this for the fire service, because I know that with your skill set and your talents, you know, you could be doing a lot of other things that would be far more profitable and far less frustrating than being the U.S. fire administrator. Because having known having known every other administrator, you know, it is a frustrating job.
Yes.
Just by its very nature. You're working with politicians, which, you know, it's a Greek word for poly means many, and ticks are tiny blood-sucking parasites. So you can just kid. I'm not kidding. So God bless you for that. So so it's a tough job, right? Because this administration is going to change. People are going to change. You know, there's always going to be people who don't really understand the problem, and they're not going to understand our passion, right? So and all of our friends who've had your job previously all went through different trials, and you'll go through different trials. But, you know, just so you know that they're all still here, well, most of them, and you know, so,
and I'm going to be calling them, right?
Right. Well, I spoke to most of them before our call here today, and they said to wish you the best. And, you know, they were, you know, because it's the old joke, you know, that when Alan Bernasini first took the job in Phoenix, he was actually blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and he was 6'4". You know, when he retired, he was 5 foot flat. So
Yeah.
It'll beat you down. But no, I don't think. I think it's a great role for you, and I think it's a great opportunity for you. It's a great opportunity for the fire service. We wish you nothing but the best, and you know, we'll support you in any way we can, because the mission of the fire service is the mission of all of us.
Absolutely.
And you know, it doesn't matter what your department name is or what they classify you as. At the end of the day, it's all about saving lives and you know, making the world a little bit of a safer place for everybody. So, Madam Administrator, it was absolutely a pleasure to listen to you. I think you're going to be incredibly successful. I think the world of you. You know that. I think the fire service is going to grow to love you more as they get to know you better. They're going to just fall in love with you, like we all have who know you personally. And if there's ever anything we can do for you, please let us know. I am going to hold you to an earlier commitment off air. You said you'd be willing to come in and give us some regular updates from time to time. I won't hold you to doing a whole hour, but maybe, you know, twice a year or so, biannually, you could come on and just say, hey, here's the State of the Union for the kind of like a State of the Union address to the fire service, and we'll be happy to broadcast it out for you.
I love that idea. Yes.
Or if you've got a program and you're looking for people who might have interest in it, or if you're looking for researchers, or if you're looking for whatever, you let us know, and we'll put it up there for you. Because no matter how broad your network is, there's always a guy who knows a guy who knows a gal who knows a gal who might know somebody. So
yes.
and those are the people who make the world go around. So thank you so much. We absolutely adore you as a person. And
right back at you, my friend.
we're so grateful for you. And hopefully you'll have a chance to come to FDIC. If you do, I'll let you jump up on stage for a few minutes and say hi to everybody. And you know, and you know, with your new role. So it will be in April in Indianapolis, as you know. And we've got some incredible things happening there that are just going to make you extremely happy. So, yeah.
That's awesome. It would be my great pleasure to join you, Bobby.
And thank you to all of you who've just joined with us today for listening. And ladies and gentlemen, our new U.S. Fire Administrator.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Bobby.
Congratulations, ma'am.
Thank you.